And now then, very happy to welcome back Jeff Pearlman to the show. He has written a new book which has been really well received all around. It is called Three Ring Circus, Kobe, Shaq, Phil, and the Crazy Years of the Lakers Dynasty. And Jeff Pearlman, it's very good to have you with us. How you doing?
I mean, I'm living in 2020, so I can't say it's the best year ever, but I'm doing okay. Thank you for asking. Doing all right.
Any journalist or colleague I speak to who writes a book, it generally takes minimum of a year, probably more than that. And the usual response at the end of that is never again. You keep churning them out.
Guys got to eat. Um, yeah, they beat the crap out of you. They actually beat the crap out of you, and I understand never again because you go through. It's like you go through all the stages of grief, but there's no end. It's like a net. You go through the writing stages of grief. I'm never doing this again. Why won't anyone talk to me? This is the worst thing I've ever written. I'm never going to be able to finish it. Nobody's going to want to buy it. Even though they do buy it, everyone's going to say it sucks. Nobody's going to care. And if you're lucky, only half of those come true, and the rest is okay. But it beats the crap out of you. I'm not saying it's firefighting or saving lives or anything important, but it definitely beats the crap out of you.
And do you nervously wait on the reviews?
No, not really. Number one, because you don't get it. You get more reviews, like you get Amazon reviews. So you get reviewers on Amazon. And obviously would like good reviews, and I do look, but it's not the same. It used to be there were a lot more actual book reviewers. So you'd get different newspapers that have book reviewers. And now there's so few of them. In a way, you're even happy. Let's say the New York Times gives you a bad review. In a way, you'd rather have a bad review from the New York Times than no review from the New York Times, because at least they're paying attention. Like this book, I didn't get any review from the New York Times. So I'd probably rather have a bad review in some ways. No.
So, I mean, I think from my perspective as a non-hardcore basketball fan, the most famous basketball players in my lifetime are very simply Jordan, LeBron, Kobe, Shaq, and the most famous coach is Phil Jackson. So when you get 3 out of that 5 winning 3 championships, plus full-on feud between 2 of them, with the third trying to manage it, I mean, I'm in. I get it. I get why you wrote this book.
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one reason was I think you kind of nailed it. It's just the characters. Like people think, oh, you did it. Are you a Lakers fan? No. Do you care about the Lakers? Not that much. It's just the characters are so huge and dynamic. And I feel like when you're looking for a subject to write in nonfiction, it helps to have big characters, and most of the books I've written have had a singular character who's sort of iconic in some way, Brett Favre or Walter Payton or whoever. And here you had 3 under one roof all at the same time, like you said, interlocking with each other. So, it made it kind of fun. The weird thing was it's hard to get away from them. Like I like writing about the entire era. So I like writing about side characters and people you haven't heard of. But it always comes back to those 3 one way or another. Every interview I did, it always seemed to come back to those 3. And I really almost had to swim against the current just to get away from them at some point.
The era we're talking about here is 96 to 04, give or take, within which the Lakers won 3 titles in a row. So Kobe and Shaq pitch up around the same time to LA in very, very different ways, very different points in their career.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Kobe was drafted. He was actually drafted by Charlotte, but they had an agreement with the Lakers that the Lakers would get him in a trade. And then Shaq came as a free agent. He had played his first 4 years with the Orlando Magic, and he was a free agent. And they showed up, and nobody, Kobe, he was interesting and intriguing because he came straight from high school. Not that many guys that come straight from high school at that point. But Shaq was really the marquee arrival. I mean, he had been a super duper star in Orlando. He's the biggest guy in the NBA, the most powerful guy in the NBA. He was flamboyant and articulate and dynamic and really fun and just everything you would want in a superstar. And people forget those first few years. I mean, Kobe, it wasn't Shaq and Kobe. It was Shaq and Nick Van Exel and Eddie Jones and Elton Campbell and this high school kid, Kobe, who might wind up being really good. But nobody knew at that point how good he would be. He was barely 18 years old when he got there.
What's the age gap with Shaq and Kobe?
It's I got to do the math. It is almost 6 years.
Okay, so there's 24-year-old Shaq, there's 18-year-old Kobe. I was reading different extracts of the book, and I can't wait to get stuck into the full thing. The extracts have more than whetted the appetite. So they're all introducing themselves. Start of the season, 18-year-old Kobe stands up, says, "Yo, I'm Kobe, Kobe Bryant. I went to Lower Merion High School, dominated everything. I just want you all to know nobody's going to punk me. I'm not going to let anyone in the NBA punk me. So be warned." Sits down.
Yeah, that doesn't go over well.
The crowd doesn't go wild, I take it.
No, I always say it's like someone farting in the room. Like that's their big introduction. It's not. No, it was terrible. But he was, you know, he was one of these kids who really could have. I always say, like, we all need developmental periods in our life that create a human being. You know, like we need to ask someone out and be rejected, right? We need to take our driving test and have our hands on the wheel, being really nervous as a person sitting next to us. You know, we need all the scary things and the highs and the lows that come with youth. You know, I asked a girl to the prom, Michelle Sheehan. She said no. I was devastated. True story. You need that. Like, you actually need those moments. And Kobe didn't have any of those moments. He was raised in Italy. He was a basketball star from a young age. He came to Pennsylvania, Lower Merion. He had the awkward fit of being a sort of one of the few African-American faces in a white upper-class world. His dad was an NBA star. He was destined to be an NBA star. He went to his senior prom on an arranged date with the pop singer Brandy. He had a sneaker deal at 17. He shows up at the NBA in the NBA at 18. He just never learned how to deal with people, really, and human interactions and the highs and lows. And again, you know, the nervousness of asking a girl out and having her say no. Those things are so important, and he didn't have any of it. So when he shows up, he's trying to figure out who he is and how you're supposed to behave, but he really has no clue how to do it. So he thinks at 18, I'm going to set my tone by saying nobody here is going to punk me, not realizing that everyone there finds it utterly ridiculous, you know? So it's, he just didn't know. He didn't know. He never knew. The hardest thing for that guy throughout his career, he was always trying to be someone different. He was always trying to either be, at first he was imitating Michael Jordan. So everything he did was like Michael Jordan. Then he would try to imitate Allen Iverson, and he's a tough guy. Then he wanted to be Will Smith. You know, then he started getting tattoos and speaking in slang, and nobody ever bought it. You know, like, it was this big thing in life. And I really think the best thing that happened to Kobe Bryant in his career is he got hurt and he got old. And when you get hurt and you get old and you're not the best player anymore, and you're on some crappy Laker teams, the teams aren't competitive and you're not very good, you start realizing there's more to life than basketball. Then you have kids, you know, you had 4 daughters, and you really start realizing there's more to life than basketball. And I feel like that transition, that late career transition, was as important to him as anything could have been.
Yeah, there's a real Tiger Woods parallel there. And does
Mm-hmm.
24, 25, 26-year-old Shaq in those initial years, does he try and put an arm around the shoulder and soften this kid up, or what's his reaction?
Well, he kind of wants to be. Shaq has this thing in life where he wants to be the big brother, and he wants to be like Batman to Kobe's Robin. You know, that's how he thinks in those terms. He wants to be this thing, and he's one of the best teammates ever. If you let him be a great teammate, like he was always buying teammates meals, taking you out for dinner, or if a teammate needed a suit, you'd buy him a suit. If you need, you know, I'm going to fly your parents in for your first game in the NBA. No, you don't have to know. I'm telling you, I'm going to. And then he'd fly him in first class. Like, he was that kind of guy. And he just wanted Kobe to embrace it. That's all he needed. It's Kobe to embrace it. You know, Shaq's a leader of this team. And hey, Shaq, what do you think about this? But Kobe didn't need it or want it. And that sounds negative toward Kobe. It's really not. Like, he just wasn't built that way. He didn't think in terms of, I need a big brother to steer me through this path. He just wanted to play basketball and be great and dominate. But that really sort of, I think, offended Shaq's sensibilities. You know, like, that's not, what do you mean you don't want me? Like, what do you mean you don't want help? That doesn't make any sense. So I think that led to a lot of the hostility.
Okay. And also, it would seem that there are different approaches to the game. I mean, sometimes chemistry is just off with people, and there's no real good reason that you can verbalize or come up with. It's just off. But it seems like they also had their reasons, including how the other went about their business.
Yeah, I mean, Kobe was of the mindset that when you're not playing, you're practicing. And, you know, it's the off season, you should be shooting 500 jump shots a day and doing all these sprints and blah, blah. And to his credit, truly to his credit, he worked his butt off. And when he died out here in Southern California, what you heard people saying a lot of was Kobe Bryant taught me how to work hard. He taught me the importance of work ethic. He taught me what it means to grind. So, more power to him. Like, that is a very impressive way to go about your career. Shaq, on the other hand, I kind of prefer his way in a way. Like, Shaq was, I'm 27 years old. I spend the season getting my ass kicked. Like, I'm huge, and there's always 2 or 3 guys beating the crap out of me. And when I'm done with the season, I'm physically decimated. My body is beaten. So you know what I'm going to do in the off season? I'm going to float in my pool on a little raft, and I'm going to smoke cigars. I'm going to eat cheeseburgers, and I'm going to heal. That's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to enjoy it. And I'm going to work on my hip hop career, and maybe someone wants me to do a commercial. Maybe I'll be in a movie, and I'm going to enjoy it. And I always think, if you look back, people criticize Shaq, and they'll be like, "Why? If he only had Kobe's work ethic, if he only worked as hard as Kobe." You're 27 years old. You're making whatever it is, $20 million a year. You're starring the NBA. You should be smoking a cigar in your off season. Like, you should be floating in a pool. Like, you're never going to have this again. Like, this moment in time, this joyful, blissful moment in time. And I just think a lot of athletes I've interviewed through the years will always say, I'll enjoy it when I look back later. And I think that's such a terrible. I mean, look, Kobe Bryant died. Like, there is no more looking back. You never know what's going to happen in your life. And to just think, like, also, like, I started my career 20 years ago at a newspaper in Tennessee. I don't remember that much about it anymore. I remember little things about it. But if I was like, I'm just going to enjoy it later. Well, here I am. I'm sitting here later. I don't have the same feelings. So I do think you have to lather in the moment. I think Shaq understood lather the moment. On
the flip side, then, he looked at Kobe and thought he was utterly selfish on the court, it seems. Fair? He was selfish?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where sometimes in sports, your selfishness helps a team. Certainly in baseball, I know baseball isn't a huge sport here, but like in baseball, you can be, if you hit 40 home runs in a season, but you're a selfish jerk, you're still hitting 40 home runs a year. So you're helping your team, it doesn't matter if you're not high-fiving everyone, you're helping your team. Basketball doesn't have that same individuality, obviously, but I do think Kobe Bryant was such a good basketball player. He was so dominant. He was so electrifying. They don't win those 3 championships without him. So on the one hand, his greatness brought them greatness. On the other hand, he could be maddening to play with. He didn't pass the ball. He didn't look to pass the ball. He thought he should be the number 1 option. So it's kind of 50-50, But Shaq, there's a play that made them famous, not made them famous, but is famous. It happened in the playoff game against Portland. And I don't know if you've seen it or not, but
yeah,
Kobe throws Shaq this alley-oop. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And Shaq slams it, and then he's running down the court, and he's pointing and he's screaming. And people always say, kind of in a cliche, robotic way, well, that was the definitive moment of their career. And I really, honestly, from working on this book, I just think it's so memorable because that stuff rarely happened. Like, they were great because of their individual greatness. Like, they were great because they had the best shooting guard in the NBA and the best center on the court at the same time playing for the best coach. But that moment, most of the time, Kobe shoots that ball. And then they have a timeout. And they go into the timeout, and Shaq says to Kobe, why the hell didn't you pass me the ball? And Kobe says, well, your fat ass wasn't in the right position. And Kobe says, well, if you pass me the ball, blah, blah, blah. And they're going back and forth. Like, most of the time, it doesn't work out the way it did. Mm-hmm. And what makes it memorable is that it actually worked out. It actually happened. But Kobe was not one to throw Shaq alley-oops that often. It just wasn't really a thing.
So, Phil Jackson arrives and they throw, $30 million contract at him. And it seems Kobe and Shaq definitely want Jackson to arrive, and Tex Winter as well. And thankfully, we have The Last Dance as a nice reference point here. So when I say triangle offense, everybody kind of knows what it means now. But that's about teamwork. That's about Jordan passing the ball more. Based on what you're saying, it doesn't sound like Kobe ever wilted all that much or became a selfless player, which begs the question, did they reach the heights they should have reached, acknowledging they won 3 titles?
I think they did. I mean, it's hard. I mean, not that many teams win back-to-back NBA titles, right? And on the one hand, it's interesting. Was The Last Dance very popular in Ireland, like in your circles?
Find me somewhere where it's not very popular. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good. It had some holes, but I thought it was really, really good. Like, really, really good and enjoyable, and reminded me how great Jordan was, which I really liked, actually. Thing about the triangle in Chicago, the biggest difference, I think, is in Chicago, the pecking order was very clear, right? Phil Jackson's a coach. Michael Jordan's the best player. Scottie Pippen is not trying to be Michael Jordan. There's not one moment in The Last Dance where Scottie Pippen says, I was better than Jordan, ever. There's no hint of it. And then Tony Kukoc was never trying to be better than Pippen. Like, it's not, there's a very clear order. And Dennis Rodman was just there to rebound. So he never cared about scoring. When Phil Jackson shows up in LA, it's much more confusing because you have two guys who want to be Jordan, two guys who think they should be carrying the offense. So it was a much harder, I think, and in a way more impressive coaching job that Phil Jackson did in LA, because he had to deal with these two massive egos who both thought they were number one. The triangle was never as good in LA, I don't think, as it was in Chicago for that reason. And because Kobe, the thing Kobe would do that used to drive teammates crazy, they would play a team where they had a superstar. Like they would play Vince Carter on the Toronto Raptors, or they play Iverson in Philly. And Kobe in his mind would get it where I have to outdo that guy. And it became this one-on-one battle. And the other Lakers would be really, they knew heading into Toronto, this was going to suck. This would not be a fun game because Kobe would want to take it at Vince Carter every time. So it was a lot of Phil having to take Kobe and bring him back. And Kobe would go out and you have to bring him back. This constant, like, listen, this is what we do. Bring him back. And it would work for a while. And then it would break down. It would work and it would break down. But again, the one thing they had, no matter what, was they had two of the five best players in the world on the court at the same time.
Yeah. You had a quote from Olden Polynice. They were just two alpha males who couldn't coexist. Even when it works, it never really works, which is probably the best summation of it. So you mentioned the time out there and how they would go at each other. So this doesn't sound like it was we just don't speak or interact relationship.
No.
This sounds fiery. These are at each other.
Well, it's kind of weird. Yes and no. So when I interviewed a lot of guys who covered the team during that time. And it's kind of weird because Shaq and Kobe, two guys, seemed very confident. A lot of their back and forth was through the press. Like the media would come into the locker room after the game and they'd go over to Shaq's locker. And maybe Shaq would say, he'd be like, yeah, we would have done better if somebody hadn't shot 26 times. Okay. Yeah, I'll go over to Kobe's locker. Hey, Kobe, Shaq said they would have done better. Yeah, well, I'm just saying, maybe if someone could hit more than 2 out of 10 free throws, we'd have a chance. They go back to Shaq. Well, maybe. Like, they're only 15 feet apart from each other in the locker room. It's this huge passive-aggressive, stupid thing. So they would have their moments where they'd have it out. They'd have moments of joy, too. Like, it wasn't all negative. They had moments of, giddiness where they would win or some. It wasn't like they were rooting against each other to do well. It wasn't that. But so they had moments of direct confrontation. They had a couple of fights. But they also had a lot of passive-aggressive, weird bickering.
Because I know there was a fight where Shaq says, this is my team. And
yeah.
No, you're no leader. You're nothing. This is my team. I mean, that's the argument boiled down, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's stupid if you think about it. Like, that's the thing about it. The biggest takeaway from the book to me, from researching it, is you two guys are idiots. Like, you're making millions of dollars. You're playing for the Los Angeles Lakers. You're winning NBA championships, and you're concerned with who the quote-unquote alpha dog is. Yeah. So it's like, get a life. Like, you're making millions of dollars to play basketball. Like right now there's some vendor making $9 an hour trying to feed his kids, and you're arguing over who the alpha dog is.
Yes.
It gives you crap. It's the stupidest argument ever.
And so Phil Jackson burning his incense and meditating, is he horrified at the aggressive interaction, or is he trying to sort it out, or is he kind of thinking there's a healthy aspect to this potentially?
I think all of the above. I don't know how. I think he was horrified by Kobe at times and the selfishness of Kobe and just trying to get Kobe to play as a teammate. I think sometimes he was bemused by it all. Like, it's kind of amusing to him, and like, well, maybe this will help us. Maybe it'll hurt us. He was pretty big into letting the locker room figure itself out, not always being a babysitter, which I think is the way to go. I don't think he thought incense and handing out books was going to solve the problems. I think he thought some self-reflection would be helpful. I don't know if it was or not. I think most of the times when they did meditation, Shaq would fall asleep. Like, nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I think like mostly it's like, all right, these guys are immature and they're annoying, but they're also really, really good. So let's just work with it the best we can, And also, the Lakers surrounded them with really good role players. Like, those locker rooms were always filled with smart veterans, always. So it wasn't like there were a bunch of 23-year-olds who were going to feed off of this and take sides and start arguing and bickering. It wasn't like that at all. The veterans knew what they were doing. They knew how to handle this. They knew it was kind of stupid, but all right, we'll ride it and win some championships. So it wasn't as bad. It wasn't as crazy as one would think.
Okay, you kind of answered my next question, because I was very curious about the locker room and if it was a case of, can you ask Shaq to pass the salt? At dinner time, these guys live together. It's day in, day out. I was wondering if you had a sense of whether or not the other teammates enjoyed their daily work.
Yeah, they didn't. The thing is, like, I'm telling you, most of the guys, the Lakers were really smart. So when Shaq and Kobe first got there, they joined two other really good players. This guy, Nick Van Exel, was a point guard, and Eddie Jones, who was a shooting guard. And they were both young, explosive, dynamic NBA players. And they were the wrong kind of guys to have in that situation. Like, what you needed was Shaq and Kobe. Really what you needed were a bunch of guys who were 30, 31, 32, who'd been around, who'd experienced a game, who wouldn't be shaken by this. Like Rick Fox was one of their stars, one of their role players. Rick Fox had been a star in Boston. He learned under Larry Bird and Kevin McHale. He'd been around. Robert Horry was another one of their guys. He won championships with Hakeem Olajuwon in Houston. He'd been around. Like a lot of the Bryant Shaw was a star. Had been a really good NBA player. He played in Boston. He played in Shaq with Orlando. Now he was like 30 years old. He had lost his parents in a tragic car accident. Like he'd experienced life. Like I just think all those guys, they were able to look at their relationship and sort of shrug.
Okay.
Just like, all right, whatever.
And Jeff, the success comes, the 3 championships in a row, Phil Jackson's doing his thing. Does that put a degree of coolant on the fire in the relationship? Does it get better? Does it get worse through the successful years?
I think it stays pretty consistent, which is not great,
Okay.
but workable. I mean, I would say by the end, their last season together was 2003, 2004, and that was a nightmare. Like that was the worst season ever. I mean, that was a year the Lakers brought in 2 superstars, Gary Payton and Carmelo, 2 older superstars, to make kind of a dream team. Kobe Bryant was going in he was charged with raping a woman in Colorado, and he was flying back and forth that season. Shaq was overweight. He wanted a contract extended. The Lakers didn't want to do it. Kobe was about to be a free agent. He was threatening to go to the Clippers, who played in the same building. Phil Jackson didn't know if he was coming back or not. Like the whole season was just a mess. And when it ended, Kobe said to one of his teammates, this guard named Kareem Rush, he said about Shaq, he said, "I'm never playing with that mother effer again. Like I'm just done." So by the end of it, he was done.
Okay. And did one assume alpha status clearly above the other at any stage in this thing, or was it pretty much there's 2 of us the whole time?
No, I think Shaq, most would say, was the lead dog of those Lakers. I mean, he's just older and he was more important. He was unstoppable. He was more important. So, like I always say, I think if you took Shaq and whatever, a really good point guard, Steve Nash or Allen Iverson, I think those Lakers still win championships. If you take Kobe and a really good NBA center, but not Shaq, Alonzo Mourning or Dikembe Mutombo, I don't think they're winning championships. Like Shaq was, at that time, the most important part of that team. So I think by that standard alone, he was. And also Phil Jackson made it very clear Shaq is the center of this offense. And I think those things combined made him that. And also he had this big personality, this really big, joyful, lovable personality that drew people toward him.
Jeff, if you're covering this period and you're covering Kobe, you have to go deep into the sexual assault case, which you did. Just for people who are vaguely half aware of the details, it's a long time ago now. You might just paint broadly what happened.
Yeah, so he was in, this is 2003, and it's 2003, and after the season, he went to Eagle, Colorado for a knee surgery. And he didn't book it with the Lakers. He did it on his own, which pissed the Lakers off. They didn't even know he was getting a surgery. And while he was in Eagle, Colorado, he stayed at a hotel. And there was a young woman working at the front desk of that hotel. And basically, she showed him to his room. Then he invited her back to the room, came back. And they started fooling around. And she, the next day, she went to the police and said she was raped by Kobe Bryant. And there's this really crazy moment in the book and just in life where detectives show up at the hotel the next day, and Kobe had his surgery and he's on crutches. And they pull up to the hotel and Kobe's in the parking lot. They approach him. They're like, they didn't understand why he was in the parking lot. They thought maybe he was tipped off, but they show up and they're basically telling him that this woman accused him of rape. And at first he says, That's crazy. I don't, what, rape? Are you kidding? Well, I don't understand. No, no, no. And then they kind of keep going. They're like, well, listen, she submitted a rape test and we did a test of hair and her underwear. So then he's like, well, okay, well, here's the thing. I did have sex with her because he initially said he didn't have sex with her. So they caught him in a lie 5 minutes into this interview. I did have sex with her, blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, when you read the transcript of this interview, him with the two detectives in Colorado, just as a functioning human being, you want to scream at him, tell them you need your attorney. Like, don't say anything else. You need a lawyer there. You need a lawyer there. He just keeps going and going and going and going. At one point, they're like, we don't want to embarrass you here in public. Why don't we go back to your room? Let's go back to your room and talk that way. It'll be in private. But they just want him to take him back to the scene of the crime. And he does. So they go back to the room and they're collecting samples and blah, blah, blah. And he admits them that he likes ejaculating in women's faces and he likes grabbing women around the neck. It's this crazy, crazy interview. It's crazy. It's one of the craziest interviews I've ever read. And again, you're just screaming at Kobe, shut up and tell them you need an attorney. Just, from a legal standpoint, just tell them you need an attorney. And it goes on and on and on. And he's basically charged with rape. And I interviewed the district attorney on the case. I interviewed one of the lead detectives. They're both convinced he did it. But as in the lead up to the trial, the woman, she was having a really rough time. She was being followed around by newspapers and tabloids and National Enquirer, blah, blah, blah. And she basically settled with him out of court. And the case went away. So, it was, I think, really close to Kobe Bryant going to prison for a long time. And I'm not saying he did or didn't do it. I'm just saying the district attorney felt very secure in his case. The lead detective felt very secure in the case. So, I think that easily he could have gotten to prison.
I mean, around the time of his death, it was very clear that still was part of his legacy. And even when, I heard the news and we were covering it on the show that evening, which is 24 hours on from the death, to what extent you cover that incident so soon afterwards is a question mark we all had. Ultimately, we did, because it just felt too much a part of his legacy and not to,
Right.
At the same time, it doesn't seem to have dented his popularity, even before his death, I mean here, Jeff. And I don't just mean loyal Lakers fans. Like, America at large seemed to really, really like this guy. It didn't seem to hang over him.
So it did for a while. Like,
Okay.
it happened. He lost all his endorsements. He would show up in arenas. People would have, prison outfits with Bryant #8 on it, like stuff like that. And then he had one of the most inexplicable second acts I've ever seen. And the only way I can explain it, sometimes we in America, we make ourselves sound too important. Like, in America, everybody blank, in America, everyone blanks. But I will say, we are suckers for like a second act. We just are. We are suckers for a comeback. We love singers who fall off and have a hit 15 years later. We love actors who are given up, who don't show up on screen and then all of a sudden they're starring in a movie and we're like, yeah, the comeback. Like, we love that stuff. Maybe everyone does, but we definitely do. And I feel like Kobe, he went through it all. Shaq is traded. The Lakers suck. And then he comes back and wins these titles, kind of wills the Lakers these titles. And toward the end of his career, he just was really likable. Like, he just came off as really likable. And when he started, showing up with his daughters, he just seemed really likable. And I don't know what happened. I can't explain it. You're 100% right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I mean, I guess you can make the argument. He was never found guilty of a crime. He was charged with it. I mean, it's one of the most amazing second acts I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen a second act like that.
And I presume towards the end of his life, it wasn't something he ever wanted to discuss publicly in an interview. Or did we ever hear from the woman in the case again publicly?
No. And he was interviewed. The only interview I ever saw with Kobe about that at all was he talked to a Washington Post reporter named Kent Babb briefly about it. He wouldn't talk for the book, so I didn't go for that. I can't blame him for not talking about it. It's not exactly a stellar moment in his life. But no, he almost never discussed it.
Your thoughts when he passed away?
I mean, it's weird. Like, you work 2 years on a book and you dive into this guy's life deeply. And then one day I'm sitting in a coffee shop, the book is done, and a friend of mine named Amy Bass texted me and said, I don't, something like, rumors are Kobe's dead. And, like disbelief times 1,000, like legit sadness, like really sad. When you find out his daughter's on the plane and all those other people are on the plane with him, on the helicopter with him, just, yeah, it's just sad. It feels, because 2020 is such a weird year, it feels a lot longer ago than it was. So many things have happened this year, but it was, out here in LA, the thing that was interesting out here is it really educated me about the impact he had on people. Sincerely. I grew up in New York. I moved here 6 years ago. I knew Kobe was a big deal here. But when he died, all you kept hearing from people over and over again, especially young people, people in their 20s, late teens, maybe early 30s, Kobe taught me how to never give up. Kobe taught me how to be dogged. Kobe taught me that it's all about the fight and not giving. And it's an amazing legacy. Like, it wasn't even, people weren't really bringing up Kobe won 5 championships. It was more about what I learned from watching him, and that's pretty freaking profound. So it was an amazing educational experience for me as a sports writer about what it is about maybe an athlete that can influence people beyond just wins and losses.
Okay. And in terms of his treatment of teammates, because certainly in his early years, he was, again, even allowing for the culture in the locker room, he was a bully. It seems he would pretty much bully the rookies. Could be. Okay, maybe not every day, sure. Was he a better teammate? Is it like generally just a more copped on person as time went by in every aspect, or did he always have that kind of Jordan bully-esque kind of vibe?
I think it was a little of both. I think he had both. I think he always had a little bit of that edge. But I think with the transition from great player to good player to kind of okay player, he definitely softened.
Okay.
He definitely softened. He still always had that. I don't think he got rid of that totally, but he definitely softened.
Okay. As for Shaq, we saw him on TV when Kobe passed away. Their relationship towards the end?
Like, fine. I feel like when you saw Shaq really devastated, I think it makes sense. Like, this is what I always say. I use this example. Are you familiar with the American music group Hall & Oates?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a big Hall & Oates fan, right?
Okay.
Hall & Oates, they still tour. They're still together all these years later, 50 years in. You can't think of Hall without Oates. You can't think of Oates without Hall. They fly in, they do their shows, they leave. It's not like they go out to dinner. They don't ask about families. None of that. They just leave. They're not friends. They're just partners. I think that's what Shaq and Kobe were. Like, you can't think of Shaq without Kobe. You can't think of Kobe without Shaq. They were intertwined. They were always intertwined. I think when Kobe died, in the same way, I'm sure like Darrell Hall would be devastated when John Oates dies, because you have this shared history with each other. I think he realized he lost like this partner who was a part of something really special, a special period in his life, a special connective tissue between the two of them. And even if they didn't like each other a lot of times and didn't love each other a lot of times, they had a kinship, and I think Shaq definitely felt the loss of that kinship.
Well, listen, the book again is Three Ring Circus, Kobe, Shaq, Phil, and the Crazy Years of the Lakers Dynasty by Jeff Pearlman. I hope we've whetted the appetite for people. The beauty of this is in the detail. And I suspect post Last Dance in particular, there's such an interest in this almost next chapter in the NBA. So well done in the book, and people can get it in all sorts of places, I'm sure. So Jeff Pearlman, great to have you with us. Thanks again.
Oh, thank you so much. That was great.